Hello, everyone. I'm Kamal Chomani, the editor-in-chief of the Amargi here in Leipzig. Iran and the Middle East have entered a historic moment. Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei is dead. Iran and Israel are in open war, and the US is directly involved. Iran is retaliating not only against Israel and Americans, but almost against every single country in the region that has US bases. The Kurds recently were almost thrown under the bus by the Americans in Syria. However, they are gaining momentum again in Iran. President Trump has also been calling Kurdish leaders in Iraq and also the Kurdish leaders in Iran, including Masoud Barzani, the KDPI president, and Bafel Talabani, the president of the PUK. As Washington looks for leverage on Iran's borders, the United States needs the Kurds in Iran to win this war. I want to keep this short and practical. With my guest, Dr. Michael Rubin, a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where he specializes in Middle Eastern countries, particularly Iran and Turkey. His career includes time as a Pentagon official, as well as he has also contributed military education. He has many publications, many journalistic pieces, and very critical and to the point ideas to the region. Among them, dancing with the devil and eternal Iran. So today we will be discussing current issues from Washington to Tehran, all the way to Erbil and Tel Aviv. We delve into what happens next inside Iran, what are the war's real objectives, and where do the Kurds fit into this. Welcome, Kak Michael.
Thank you so much, Kakama.
My pleasure. In your view, is the goal of this war is deterrence, nuclear rollback, or regime change? And which one is the most realistic? Because one of the key questions for the people in the region, especially Iranians, and more particularly the Kurds, they still don't understand whether regime change is in the plan or not.
Well, honestly, we don't understand that in Washington either. Donald Trump has not been very clear. And this is why, from the perspective of Iranian Kurds, I would be very cautious, because Donald Trump isn't saying what he wants, why he needs them, or offering concrete promises that this isn't going to be another 1975 or, more recently, another Rojava.
Then if the Kurds, if it is not clear for you from Washington, what the Kurds should ask from the United States so that there will be guarantees, at least, for example, because we also have good experience with the United States and the international community in 1991 when they established no-fly zone. And you have recently also asked for no-fly zone for Rojava, for the eastern part of Kurdistan. What should be the Kurdish very concrete demand from the United States to be part of this war against Iran?
Number one, no Turks in Iranian territory. This idea that President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has of a buffer zone, that goes out the window. The second issue would be some sort of protection guarantee. But here's the problem. Don't just accept a promise, because in 1991, Turgut Özal, the president of Turkey at the time, was in favor of a no-fly zone. Recep Tayyip Erdogan is telling the Americans he won't allow any American plane to fly over Turkey unless we agree to give Turkey F-35 Joint Strike Fighters first. And so it's not clear that we would be able to operate a no-fly zone. Does that mean then that there should be Americans on the ground in order to defend the Kurds? That it may sound preposterous in Washington, but the Kurds have to think of themselves and not American politics.
So we have a very bad experience with regard to Turkey. Apart from Turkey has been denying the Kurdish existence in Turkey for the last 100 years, but also the United States has criminalized the Kurdish freedom movement in Turkey, like listing the PKK as a terrorist organization that has massively affected and damaged the PKK image internationally. So, and how can we trust this time that the United States will not preferring the Erdogan, because as you know, Tom Barak has very good connections with Erdogan and the Turk state, as well as the United States. President Trump has very good connections. So what has changed that we may believe, we may trust the United States that this time we will not throwing the Kurds under the bus for the Turks? Is it Israel's being part of the war, or what's that thing? What's that thing that you think is very
No,
important?
I would say, Kamal, you put your finger right on the issue. Tom Barak is not just an American ambassador. At this point, he's pretty much Recep Tayyip Erdogan's mistress. They curl up together at bed at night and whisper sweet nothings into each other's ears. Of course, I'm saying that figuratively rather than literally, but they appear to be that close. So you've got a situation where you're also right. The United States has criminalized, has designated the PKK as a terrorist group. What's actually important here is whether we trace the foundation of the PKK to the late 1970s or a little bit later, the fact of the matter is the United States did not designate the PKK to be a terrorist group until 1997. Context is important. The Bill Clinton administration did it at the time in order to win a helicopter, a multi-million-dollar helicopter deal with the Turks. It was one of these Turkish demands. So it wasn't even about terrorism. And of course, the PKK has never targeted Americans specifically. So one of the big demands should be, number one, delist the PKK immediately. Number two, have an American official meet openly and officially with Abdullah Öcalan.
Yes, you remind me something when in one of my interviews with Murad Karaylan, at that time he was the leader of the PKK, when the Americans approached PJAK, the Free Life of Kurdistan Party, which is affiliated to the Kurdistan Workers' Party. And one of the demands of the Americans at that time in 2006, they met them in Kirkuk, was that you have to differentiate your line from the PKK. But then PJAK didn't accept it. And now PJAK is part of the Kurdish alliance in Rojava. For the first time, the Kurds in Rojava, in Iran, they have come together, they have established an alliance. So it seems that the Hakan Fidan and Turkey, they have already accepted. Today there was also a statement from the defense ministry that PJAK is the red line. So again, the issue of the PKK is playing out in eastern part of Kurdistan while there is a peace process between the PKK and Turkey. So how PJAK can approach the United States with regard to this war?
Look, I mean, the Kurds should not be foolish. The United States will promise anything and talk about partnerships as much as we want, so long as we can get from the Kurds what we want in the short term. But just as in Syria 12 years ago during the fight against the Islamic State, we're willing to promise anything, but then forget our promises. Kurds need to understand, while the Kurds have a deep sense of history, in Washington, where I'm sitting right now, history, we have short-term memory. We have historical Alzheimer's. Our sense of history is only 4 years long at most. And so Trump or any future administration isn't going to hesitate to betray the Kurds, which is why you need something in writing and you need to achieve your goals up front. Frankly speaking, it shouldn't matter what Hakan Fidan says, because objectively speaking, and the Americans know this, maybe not Tom Barak, but the CIA, the Defense Department, the State Department deep down know that the Turks have been responsible for far more terrorism with regard to support for the Islamic State, for Jabhat al-Nusra, for other groups, than the PKK ever has been. And as the Belgians have determined, the PKK isn't a terrorist group. It's a legitimate insurgency.
Okay, so President Trump has had 3 phone calls as far as we know. One was Masoud Barzani, the other one with Bafel Talabani, the other one was with Mustafa Hijri, KDPI leader. So it was good that at least one call was with the leader, a Kurdish leader in Iran. And today, Washington Post has just published it that says President Trump has asked Barzani and Talabani to choose between either Iran and the United States. And you know, the Kurdish position, especially in Kurdistan region of Iraq as a government, they are not in a position to choose between either. How the Kurdish of Iraq can find a pathway
Yeah.
to to safely come out from this dilemma?
Well, I mean, first of all, I would love to be a fly on the wall of that call between Donald Trump and Bafel Talabani, because neither Trump nor Bafel Talabani ever shut up. And I'm kind of curious whether either of them listened to the other, or whether Bafel Talabani took the first question and then tried to give a 45-minute answer to it. I won't do that. Now, one of the reasons why I think the United States leaked word of these phone calls to Masoud Barzani and Bafel Talabani is for what you said. The Kurds have a habit of trying to, or a reputation in the United States of trying to play both sides of every issue. And we want to expose the Kurds and force them to take a decision. It's going to be very, very hard. Now, when it comes to the Talibanis, it's going to be hard because of all the oil smuggling that they do with regard to Iran. We're talking basically about their livelihood, whether Bafel Talabani and Kubad admit it or not. But anyone who's been to the areas along the border, I mean, past Halabja and so forth, sees the oil smuggling. Kurds aren't stupid. Or likewise, anyone who's been up to Haji Umran sees the KDP doing the same thing. So you have that issue. I think the difficulty is actually going to be much more on the side of Masoud Barzani, because even though he cultivates a reputation for being much more close to the Turks, he's also very isolated on Sari Rash, as is Masroor, as is Arin. And so, frankly, the Barzanis are very, very vulnerable, much more so than the Talibanis, to Iranian drones and to Iranian missiles. They may be the ones who pay the price. And here's the problem. While it's easy to kill the Barzanis by drone over Sari Rash, where can the Barzanis go? They're not used to being among their own people in Erbil. It's not clear that they're so paranoid. It's not clear they think they have any friends. Could they go back to the Barzan tribal area? That's another possibility. But the fact of the matter is, they personally are much more vulnerable than they've ever been, because while people like Masroor talk about being Peshmerga, the fact of the matter is they've never been Peshmerga in the mountains. They've been Peshmerga, if they've been Peshmerga in the mountains, it's been skiing in the resorts of Switzerland. The fact of the matter is that they need to make their decisions. When it comes to what's happening in Iran, I'm glad to see Kurdish groups in Iran coming together. This really is a triumph to have 5 groups who have come to a common perspective. But they're going to have to deal with not only Masoud Barzani trying to sabotage them from behind, but they're also going to have to deal with Reza Pahlavi, who's already fumbled the Kurdish issue so many times. This is going to be a fault line in anything that happens now and in the future. And what also the Kurds need to worry about, and I'm sorry for going on too long, is if the Americans are forced to choose between Tehran, with 80 million people in the rest of Iran, versus Iranian Kurdistan with, let's say, 10 million people, they're going to choose Tehran. And so the Kurds need to understand that if we're working with the Kurds right now, we're working with the Kurds to have regime change in Iran. And we're willing to sacrifice the Kurds for regime change in Iran.
Yeah, so you mentioned Reza Pahlavi. We don't know exactly what has been discussed between President Trump and Mustafa Hijri, the KDPI leader. However, like the majority of the Kurdish leaders in Iran, including Mustafa Hijri, in which we interviewed him for the Amargi, and also my colleague interviewed PJAK leader Amiri Karimi for the Amargi, where both have objected the leadership under Pahlavi. And we know Khomeini was very much smart. He was able to bring most of the opposition groups, at least for 1 year, to negotiate. But seems that Pahlavi has completely rejected all the, the Kurdish demands. That's why he has already considered PJAK as a terrorist organization. And still his bloc is considering the Kurdish bloc as a general as separatists. Well, we understand Israel has had, rhetorically supporting the Kurds, but at the same time, the United States, especially Israel, they have propped up Pahlavi. So how can they can reconcile with the Kurds? On one side, they are trying to support the Kurdish groups to go back to Iran to fight the regime. At the same time, they have also pushed ahead someone who is like strategically against the Kurdish demands, especially the self-rule for the Kurds.
Kamal, as you know, I've known Reza Pahlavi for about 30 years. I know him personally, and I actually think personally he's much more tolerant than many of the Kurds believe. The problem is, over the last 2 years, but let me say, sorry, Reza Pahlavi knows his father was a dictator. And for decades, when he was in exile, just about 4 or 5 kilometers from where I'm talking to you from right now in suburban Washington, D.C., um, Reza Pahlavi said, I mean, my father is a dictator. I want to be a coalition builder. But over the last 2 or 3 years, especially after this attempt to try to bring the opposition together at Georgetown University, um, Reza Pahlavi and his advisors have changed tact again. He's become much more dictatorial. Behind the scenes, it's clear that even if he doesn't want to become the Shah, all the staff members around him want that sort of autocracy. They're going into overdrive with regard to Persian nationalism. And so I would be very, very worried about the three main advisors which Reza Pahlavi has. The Kurds shouldn't trust him with this regard. That said, when the head of the KDPI talks to Donald Trump, unfortunately, the head of the KDPI isn't used to having these meetings at this level. Reza Pahlavi, to some extent, is, and is probably much better able to sweet talk and convince the American president. Now, what's actually interesting right now is Bibi Netanyahu has decided on Reza Pahlavi, period. That's who the Israelis are going with. The Americans, and we saw this with a comment by Donald Trump standing next to the German chancellor on March 3rd, aren't supporting Reza Pahlavi right now. They're talking about someone inside Iran. Now, here's my concern. When we look at the bombs which are dropping on Iran and killing the leadership, we focus on who the bombs are killing, but we don't focus on who's not being targeted. So, is there a reason why Hassan Rouhani or Mohammad Khatami, or especially Ali Larijani, haven't been targeted? Is it because they're on the B list for eradication? Or is it because we're purposely not targeting them because Donald Trump has in his mind something like Venezuela? Especially with Ali Larijani, who has the ability to talk to the Revolutionary Guard, who's worked in the Supreme Leader's office. Remember, his daughter lives in Atlanta, Georgia. He's very close to his daughter. Is there a possibility that there's negotiations going on behind the scenes with Ali Larijani? Now, I don't think Ali Larijani is what the Iranian people want, or for that matter, the Kurdish people want, but we need to understand, I'm speaking as an analyst rather than an advocate, I think something else is going on. I would also say that Reza Pahlavi could have had the support of the United States. I think the lack of professionalism of his office and his supporters have completely ruined his opportunity.
Okay, so I understand you don't have much time, but let's discuss a little bit about the scenarios for post-regime, or what's going to happen,
Yeah.
whether Iran loses this war or they can continue, whether this war will be a frozen war or a frozen conflict, or there will be a civil war. And what is although you discussed a little bit, there possibly, the United States, they have this plan where, instead of regime change, let's change the leadership. So what will be the scenario, and what will be the most expectable scenario to happen in Iran?
Okay. I don't think the Venezuela situation scenario will work, Kamal, because I don't think the Iranian people will stand by it. They didn't sacrifice 40 some odd thousand people in the streets just to have Ali Larijani. Here are my two concerns. First, with Reza Pahlavi, let's say the Americans or the Israelis actually agree on him. You're in Iraq. I mean, most people who are listening are in Iraq. And they remember in April 2003 when the Central Intelligence Agency tried to return Abdul Majid al-Houthi into Najaf. And when he came into the shrine of Imam Ali, thugs associated with Muqtada al-Sadr stabbed him to death. So here's my question. Are we going to get into a situation if Reza Pahlavi returns to Iran that we can actually keep him alive, given the number of Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps ideologues who would still be out there, and also, frankly, given the Mujahideen-e-Khalq, which would also like to see him dead because they see him in opposition to Miriam Rajavi, who I consider a terrorist as well. I don't think the Mujahideen-e-Khalq have ever given up their terrorism. So that's one problem. The other problem is in 2007, Muhammad Ali Jafari, who at the time was the head of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, decided to reorganize the Revolutionary Guard. So he put one Revolutionary Guard unit in every province of Iran. So there's 32 provinces or so. Each of those provinces has an arms depot for that Revolutionary Guard unit. What are we doing in order to secure those arms depots? Or could you have a situation where you could have up to 32 different groups, each arming themselves from those arms depots, going at it in a civil war? This is one of the reasons why I'm actually quite pessimistic that what's going to happen is peaceful. Historically, you know I'm a historian. I can't think of a single time when air power alone has resulted in regime change. The closest we came was in 1999 in Serbia with the NATO campaign against Slobodan Milosevic. But Slobodan Milosevic didn't step down from power because of the air campaign. It was actually an uprising about a year later that led him to step down from power. So I'm not sure really what Donald Trump is thinking or if he is thinking.
Kak Michael, I understand you don't have much time. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And until next time.
Thank you, Kakma.